God hardened Pharaoh's heart so that God can kill Pharaoh's firstborn. In the same way, God has hardened his own heart so that he can kill his own son. Welcome to Joel Reads Bible. I'm Joel, and I'm reading Bible so that you don't have to. And this is one of our exciting recap episodes. I don't know why I say our. It's probably just the Holy Trinity of me, myself, and I. But similar to when God says, let us make man in his image. That's what I'm doing here. Let us make a vlog series reacting to the Bible. But this is a recap of the first 10 chapters of Exodus. What I've noticed in doing these recap episodes is that when I'm actually doing the chapters, I'm pretty lighthearted, I'm making these silly jokes, and I'm having a great time. But when I get to these recap episodes, I kind of get really aggressive and really incisive, I would say. I don't want to say these are more serious episodes, but they certainly are not the same sort of laid-back reactionary videos. Exodus chapter 1 to 10, a lot has happened. And before we get into it, why don't you subscribe, you little devil? Why are you subscribed? Well, how are you not subscribed yet? This is crazy. Subscribe, like this video, leave me a comment. Not enough people are leaving me comments. This is why we're not hitting like thousands of views yet. Come on, guys. Leave me a comment and let's get into it. In Exodus chapter 1, we sort of had a recap of where we are, what's going on. And of course, the Hebrews who God placed in Egypt are starting to suffer. The new Pharaoh has made them slaves and then gets nervous because they have too many male Hebrews. So he starts to abuse them and then eventually commands that all the male Hebrews are killed, just to keep those numbers down. And I think in the episodes I make the joke, it's the opposite of China. But the thing to note, which I did note at the time, the midwives, the ones that the Pharaoh asks to go and kill all the brand new Hebrew baby boys, they don't do what they're told. And then when they're asked about it, they're like, oh my goodness, we're not even there in time to kill these kids. You know, these Hebrew women have such robust vaginas that they're just popping out those babies so quick. They're very vigorous, these women. So we don't have time to even be there to catch the babies and then, of course, kill them. And so Pharaoh believes this and is like, well, keep trying. And lo and behold, the midwives are rewarded. For what? What are they rewarded for? For lying. Remember the 10 Commandments? Well, God doesn't. He hasn't come up with them yet, but lying is okay. If you ever are asked the question, is lying objectively wrong? The answer is no. It's wrong depending on the situation, possibly. So if there are Jews under the floorboards and the Nazi is saying, are there any Jews in here? To lie in that moment is a good thing. It's objectively good and should be rewarded. If lying were objectively wrong, then I think it would be a very different story where the midwives who said the untruth are actually punished for it. But that did not happen, so we have to assume lying, sometimes fantastic. And I agree with that. In chapter 2, we have the famous story of Moses being born, put into the river in a basket lined with tar, and found by the Pharaoh's daughter. Moses essentially becomes a prince of Egypt. But in the meantime, because there's nobody to nurse him, Moses' sister, I believe, convinces Pharaoh's daughter to let his mom nurse him. And the Pharaoh's daughter says, I will pay you. And that's so confusing to me because these are slaves. Like, these are Pharaoh's slaves. So why on earth would Pharaoh's daughter need to pay her? I don't get that. This is where I have this theory that the Hebrews are not slaves in Egypt. It says slaves, but it means indentured servants. And there's a few things that I picked up on which makes it feel like they're not like slaves that are just living in hovels, fed scraps. They actually have a community. They actually have a city. They actually have elders. There's a lot to them, which makes it seem like, are they indentured servants? Like, what kind of slavery is this? Is this the good kind of slavery that apologists want us to believe is okay in the Bible? Maybe they just have to pay taxes. Maybe the slavery isn't that bad. I just don't know why God's upset about it then. Now, Moses grows up and quickly murders an Egyptian. Doesn't spend that much time doing other things. Now, I always wonder how Moses knows he's Hebrew, because he'll know it seems like he knows he's Hebrew. It's never explained to him. But maybe when he was being raised by his mother, they were like, by the way, this is your actual mom, you're Hebrew. When you go back to the palace, just don't forget that you're Hebrew, or something like that. Never really writes that, but I think that's just a generous thing to accept because he does know that he's a Hebrew. But anyway, this is one of the indicators that he knows he's Hebrew. He sees an Egyptian beating up on another Hebrew, and he's like, nah, not my brother, not this time. And he unalives that Egyptian. And that's murder, which is never corrected by God. There's a consequence for it, but it's a consequence that Pharaoh kind of gives Moses. But it's never, ever mentioned or corrected, it seems, in any way. It does sort of foreshadow Moses' personality and his character trait. And this is, thinking of it now, kind of a cool sort of like, finally we have a very specific character. He's angry. He has problems with anger. And we're going to see that all throughout the book. I know that. And I know that the reason why he's not allowed in the promised land is anger. It's anger, not murder. You know what I mean? Like, you think it'd be one of the top 10, that was the problem. But murder seems okay in this context. But we'll see that it's the anger that really gets God going. And one of my favorite verses is Exodus 2, verse 15. It goes, when Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. And I sort of tried to explain why I find that so funny when I did the episode, but I want to give it another go here. When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses. So that can happen pretty quick. Moses killed an Egyptian. All right, let's go and try to kill him. And people go and try to kill him. But Moses fled from Pharaoh, and he goes and runs away. Okay, so that all can happen in a similar time frame. And went to live in Midian. So now he's actually settling somewhere. So now he's going to live there. I don't know how long he lives there. And then where he sat down by a well. Did this all happen in one day? Or did this happen over a week, and then on one particular day he sits down by a well? It feels like it's going to be days, or maybe a day, and then like some months where he went to live in Midian. Like, what does that mean? Where he sat down by a well, like all the time, constantly, it's just such a funny, silly way of writing that verse. So I really love that, and it's Genesis 2:15. I should remember that's one of my favorite verses in the Bible so far. So Moses is, again, half raised by Hebrews. I don't think he was a prince of Egypt. I think that happens in those movies, and it's not accurate. I feel like he must be mostly Hebrew, aware of his Hebrew heritage, and just happened to live in the palace for a bit, and they didn't know that he was Hebrew, but Moses knew he was Hebrew, because for some reason, he knows the rule that you cannot look upon God and live. I mean, I don't know if it's a rule because it just said that he hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. But it seems like it might be what they were taught. But it's not true, obviously, because Jacob did look in the face of God and live. And you would think that Moses would know that story, especially if he allegedly wrote this down. Then he would have been told that Jacob did indeed see God and lived. Then I have a brand new favorite verse for you, Exodus 3, verses 11 and 12. When you're talking to Christians and you're trying to have a conversation or a debate about anything, like proof of God existing, slavery in the Bible, any of these myriad topics that you might talk to a Christian about. And they never give you a straight answer. They talk around and you're like, just answer the question. They don't want to answer the question, and they come by it honestly. Exodus 3 verses 11 and 12. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" Verse 12. And God said, "I will be with you. And this will be a sign that I have to you that I have sent you to." This is not answering the question. It's who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Well, I'll be with you. Well, but who am I? Why aren't you answering the question of who am I? No, but I will be with you. And here are some signs. That's not who are you? It's not I'm not saying who are you. I'm saying, who am I? Anyway, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, or the grape doesn't fall far off the vine, because their dad's just like this, God the Father. So God infringes on free will constantly, constantly. We haven't even gotten to Pharaoh hardening his heart. In verses 21 and 22, we actually see that God is going to make the Egyptians look favorably on the Israelites and give them a bunch of stuff when they finally are released. So whenever anyone wants to claim free will, as the excuse for the problem of suffering, or is why we have cancer, and that kind of thing, God doesn't really respect the level of suffering that we go through to have this free will if he keeps on infringing on it, right? You're relying so heavily on free will being the reason for all this brutality in the world, the starvation, the natural disasters. And if God is just going to flippantly be like, I'm going to make them look favorably on you so you get some gold, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. Free will is just a joke. We're suffering so that we can have free will. And you don't care at all. You keep infringing on it. Why don't you just take away the free will entirely and let us live blissful lives? How about that? They are going to plunder the Egyptians, and that's fine. It is theft, essentially, but I think that these verses are allowing theft without it being theft. You know what I mean? It's a tricky way that the Bible can be like, hey, they're not really doing proper theft. They're not. They just gave it to them. They found favor with them. So it's a good trick. And then we continue into chapter 4, and this is a reluctant hero story. This is essentially what it is, right? The Bible uses tropes all over the place, and maybe they're the ones that came up with it. Who knows? But Moses is a reluctant hero. And I would also argue, and I'm going to keep my eye on this moving forward, that this is actually Aaron's story. Moses is the one we concentrate on, but Aaron is the one that's doing a lot of the heavy lifting. It's kind of a double team. But I think that Aaron might be the one that's really has the arc, Moses is there, he's involved, but it's really Aaron that's just kind of like the unsung hero so far. Like I said, for most of the people back in Genesis, the people choice feels very arbitrary, right? Moses doesn't have any skills, right? He actually is the wrong man for the job. And then when he goes I don't want to do this, and God's like, you're going to do it. And he's like, I don't want to. It's like, come on, I'm God. I can take care of all sorts of things. He's like, I still don't want to. He's like, fine, get Aaron. Actually, I've already got him on the way. It's like, what's the point of this Moses guy? He's like a waste of time. But that's Bible, right? Everyone's just like a placeholder for whatever God wants to do. And I wouldn't be surprised if God was the one that put it in Pharaoh's heart to kill all the babies so that they did this thing where Moses goes in the thing and becomes the prince of Egypt or whatever. I wouldn't be surprised if God orchestrated all of that too, which is monstrous because a bunch of other babies would probably have died. Maybe. I'll let you know a little secret later that I don't think any of them did, and I'll tell you why. In verse 22, the Lord says, as a declaration to the Egyptians at some point, someone's going to say it, Israel is my firstborn son. And I haven't really highlighted this enough. Israel isn't God's firstborn daughter, right? God's firstborn son means something. God's daughter, who cares about a daughter, right? Like it's all about these sons. And you're going to see that constantly, right? Son, 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 son. It's a big deal when it's a son. We love the son. This is my son, my firstborn son. I'm going to take him out of Egypt. You better free my firstborn son. I love my son. If it were a daughter, In verse 21, we see that God plans on hardening Pharaoh's heart. This is before any hardening of hearts happens. In chapter 4, verse 21, God says, I'm going to do this. I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. And why is it so important? Why do I go on about it? It's infringing on free will again. God doesn't care about free will. He's never cared about free will. You don't have free will. Why are you talking about free will? Why do you think we have free will? God is always infringing on free will. He's always interfering in everything. He has a plan. He's going to do it. He might use you. He might not, but he's going to make it happen. And there is no free will about it. And if you stand in his way, he's just going to change. If Pharaoh was like, no, I really want them to go. He's like, no, they're not going yet. Also, what you'll notice for the rest of these chapters as well is that Israel isn't really the important piece in this. Israel is the firstborn son, but the reason why we need Israel out of Egypt is for God. God wants to be worshiped. That's it. It's all about him. Everyone else, stay low, no pride. You know what I mean? He's like, I'm the best. You're nothing. I don't care what you go through. I'm going to show my power. Then eventually you guys can go free into the desert to worship me. Again, I'm the best, all God's ego. That's all it is. That's the whole point. Like he literally put them in that situation so that he could do all of this. And then eventually they leave and then he's like, give me some worship. And I don't know if he's going to have a problem with them having other girlfriends or whatever, but we'll see about that. And then, of course, there's one of these contradictions. I don't understand, and you're going to find this moving forward as well. I don't understand why God shows Moses things or tells Moses to say things, and then Moses says he's not going to say things, then Aaron's going to say things, because they mix and match. There's no rhyme or reason to it. So in this case, Moses is taught some stupid magic tricks, some creepy, crawly magic tricks, throwing staffs down and turning them into snakes and stuff. But Aaron's the one that does it. Why did we show Moses then? Why didn't we, whatever. And later on, Moses was the one that didn't want to talk, and Aaron was going to talk for him, but Moses does all the talking. So it's really just like, okay, fine. We shouldn't expect much from the Bible at this point. So we get to chapter 5, and in verse 3, we see Moses bartering with Pharaoh, saying, let us go out into the desert. We're just going to worship for a 3-day trip. If we don't, we're kind of nervous that God might strike us with plagues. What? If you don't let us go, God might actually punish us and strike us with plagues. So can you please just let us go and worship him? He really wants to be worshiped right now. Now, I wouldn't put it past God, by the way, to actually punish the Hebrews for something that they can't control with all sorts of plagues or something like that. I could see God doing it, you know what I mean? But why bother saying that? God didn't threaten that. It's definitely a lie that they're planning on leaving for 3 days and coming back. That's 100% not true. And this is the type of negotiation that Moses has with Pharaoh the whole 10 chapters. He's like, let my people go so that we can worship God in the desert. It's let my people go so that we can just go do this little festival for God. But he's not saying let my people go so that we can leave forever and never come back. I think he's lying the whole time, and I think that he's bartering with Pharaoh to let them go just a bit, and then they're going to continue to go. This lie never corrected, never even mentioned. I don't even think that the writers of this book clue into that being a lie. And this is how we know that this is also another just Hebrew folk story, right? They're doing things in a particular rhythm. They're doing this negotiation thing. They're lying, they're sneaking, they're tricking. There's just like interesting things happening. Apparently, the plagues coincide with the Egyptian gods. So that's creative writing as well. So then in verse 9, after God has hardened Pharaoh's heart or made sure it's going to be hard, whatever you want to say, God makes it harder on the Hebrews. The result of that is that Pharaoh gets mad and he's like, all right, we're going to actually torture the Hebrews more. We're going to make it more difficult for them. That's the result of God, right? Like God can solve this in a heartbeat, right? He flooded the world. Like he's got power. But he doesn't do that. He wants to see the Hebrews suffer. He literally has no regard for anyone but looking like a big tough guy. He wants to look really powerful. He wants to be like, I'm God. I'm the big one. I'm powerful, guys. Verse 21 is the Hebrews going like, why are you doing this to us, Moses? They're blaming Moses because Moses is aggravating Pharaoh. They're like, why don't you leave us alone? Let us just get to work and don't aggravate the situation. And that's like close to what should be happening. They really should be going to God and saying, God, why on earth did you bring Jacob here to Goshen? Why did you do that? Why did you cause a famine resulting in that? Why did you somehow orchestrate the selling of Joseph into slavery so that you could stop the famine that you started to bring us to Goshen and then just have us enslaved for 400 years and now making it worse and worse? Why are you doing this to us? I don't get it. And I'm pretty sure I've said that before, but doesn't hurt to repeat it because it is incredibly short-sighted and monstrous. So chapter 6 is one of these chapters that not a lot happens, so we can almost gloss over it. It was just like repetition, recounting the story, some more genealogy, which we see genealogy in chapter 1, so I don't know why we need it again. Verse 3 is a little bit cryptic. It's like God is making himself known to them, but he has made himself known to people throughout all of Genesis. Like it's constant. So what are we talking about? Is it the Lord versus God? Like there's a different name. It used to be God or something, and now it's the Lord, capitals. So I don't really know what that verse means. Maybe somebody can help me in the comments. And then in verse 27, there's a weird, yes, this was the Moses and Aaron that did this thing. Is there all sorts of Moses and Aaron duos in the world at the time that were doing all sorts of other things? Is there tons of books, storybooks full of Moses and Aaron, but it's just not this Moses and Aaron? It's just a common name. I think I said that at the time too, but it's just a dumb, sort of weird way of writing things. This is the very same. It's almost like they're writing it to seem like a true story, but it's just still bad fiction. And then we start getting into the plagues in a serious way in chapter 7, and it's the plague of the blood, the water turning into blood. So Moses turns the water into blood. All the water is blood. It lists that all the water becomes blood. And then Pharaoh's magicians come along, and they also turn the water into blood. What water? I think I asked that. Where are you finding this water to turn into blood? That's a contradiction. Then they're dig beside the Nile so that we can find non-blood water. Why is there some water under the ground that's just God didn't get to or something like that? Is it all or not all? And the other question is, where do these dark arts come from? There's a secondary power that's going on. And what it sounds like to me is that there are other gods, and those gods are real. And God is combating those gods, the Hebrew God in this story, by doing plagues that directly coincide with those other gods, defeating them, and is more powerful. This God can do tricks that the other gods can't do. But that doesn't mean the other gods aren't real. They're just less powerful than this God. That's how it plays for me. It's not like, well, there's fake other gods and we don't have to really think about them and these people worship fake gods. No, it's like there's, other gods. Our God's just the good one. He's the most powerful one. I bet you that there are Christians somewhere who are going to try to make a connection between Moses turning the water into blood and Jesus turning water into wine, and then saying that the wine, the Last Supper, is his blood. I bet you somebody has made this connection, and I bet you any money... Well, I know that connection is not there. Like, that is I think it's too difficult but I bet you some Christians done it, because there's apparently like 65,000 connections in the Bible. I bet you this is one of them. Turning water into blood, water into wine. This wine is my blood. So maybe it's turning water into wine, which is the blood. Moses is like Jesus, you know what I mean? This is the type of ridiculous math. We should do a new thing, Christian math, doing that. But I've got some Christian math for you. God hardened Pharaoh's heart so that God can kill Pharaoh's firstborn. In the same way, God has hardened his own heart so that he can kill his own son. Because God could just let us go, right? He could just say, don't worry about it. All this sin, it's okay. Not believing in me, it's fine. The wages of sin is death, hell, all this, don't worry about it. But no, he's hardened his heart against us so that he could kill his own son. That's a connection. God hardens Pharaoh's heart. God kills Pharaoh's son. God hardens his own heart. God kills Jesus. Now, I do want to bring up that in verse 4, God refers to the Israelites as his divisions. Anytime anyone comes and tells you that God is a God of unity, God doesn't want us divided, he wants people to come together, anything like that, that's a lie. God is a God of division. He's very happy with that. He has his chosen people. He wants them to be divided. He calls them his divisions. So in chapter 8, we see that Pharaoh asks Moses for prayer. And this is a common thing that continues, where Pharaoh keeps on going like, pray for me that God will correct this and so I don't have to put up with all this, with this plague anymore. Solve the plague by praying to your God. So Pharaoh believes in the Hebrew God, obviously. Like, there's some signs. So he's like going, this is a powerful God. And their God is more powerful than his gods. But again, does this mean that his gods are real? Like, he believes in gods. He believes that gods are real. He believes in God's powers. He can see the powers happening when his people do it. So it really does feel like there's a battle between real gods. And there's just people stuck in the middle, Pharaoh and Moses, battling it out for the gods, because the gods can't be bothered to actually just show up and do it themselves. The Hebrew people are stuck in the middle of it, getting beaten up and everything like that. Things are worse for them. And again, my challenge is, where is this power? Like, do Christians believe that this is legitimate power? That the bad guys have the power, and then I know that a lot of them do, and then the good guys have the power. Where is the power? Why are we not seeing any water turn into blood or piles of frogs? I know this was an extenuating circumstance, but why don't we see anything? Like, absolutely any version of supernatural power existing on this earth. Like, why is it nowhere to be found? You really want to believe this, but there's literally no evidence. Yet apparently there are multiple gods, or at least one really powerful God that could do something. It's like, I get he's hidden, but if those other gods were real, why are they hidden now? You know what I mean? Like, if there was somebody that was able to touch water and turn it into blood, right? They were harnessing the power of these Egyptian gods, or the devil maybe, why are they hiding now? You can have all sorts of excuses as to why God is hiding, but why are they hiding? Has their power been stripped? Where does that come in? Just doesn't make any sense. So in chapter 9, of course, I bring up this contradiction, the pretty in-your-face livestock contradiction, that the livestock all die. Every single one of them dies. And then there's boils. And then, hey, bring in your livestock because the hail is going to kill them. What? Where? Which livestock? And we're not going to touch the Hebrews' livestock. What? They're slaves. Why? They have their own livestock? Yeah, they have their own stuff. They're slaves with the whole town. They're their own people. They're basically, in a way, not slaves. They just work for nothing except probably room and board. And then they are also able to have livestock. And then sometimes we pay them to nurse babies. Like, it's just, are they slaves? Are they even slaves? But this is a blatant contradiction, and I don't know if anybody, I'm sure somebody's come up with an apologetic for it, but there are contradictions in the Bible. Also, I kind of touch on it in the chapter, but like, there are slaves that the Egyptians are bringing in so that they don't die from the hail. They're not going to be Hebrew slaves, right? Because the Hebrew slaves are not going to be affected by hail. So what are these slaves? I really, and this is where it's like boggles my mind, because it seems so obvious to me, and maybe it's because I'm being critical, I'm looking with a critical eye, but it's like, why would you, as a writer, as God, as the who's inspiring this, like, why would you make such a stupid mistake? Unless the Egyptians had Hebrew slaves and other Egyptian slaves, why would they do that? Why would they? I mean, to be fair, 400 years ago, God had put all of the Egyptians into indentured servitude. So maybe that's what it was. So again, in chapter 10, we're getting some more negotiation. The Hebrews, aka Moses, is lying to Pharaoh. He's lying to Pharaoh, saying that, hey, man, we'll come back. Just let us bring most of our stuff. And Pharaoh's like, if I let you bring everything, you're never going to come back. So you aren't allowed to bring, let's see, your livestock. And he's like, we need to bring our livestock just in case. You know, we may have to do sacrifices. We don't know exactly what we'll need. We don't know what our God is going to want for those sacrifices. So we really got to bring everything. Now, this is where the Bible gets a little bit smarter, which I like, because in chapter 9, it's listed which crops make it through the hail. Not all of the crops were, in bloom or whatever it was. So they made it through the hailstorm. But then the locusts come and demolish those crops. And I like that because it's like the writer got smart and he was like, okay, we need something for the locusts to eat. Because if we kill all the crops with the hail, then they'll have nothing to eat. He didn't think about that for the livestock. Not clever enough for the livestock, but all of a sudden making a lot of sense when it comes to the hail/locusts problem. Sometimes the Bible learns from its own mistakes, it seems, and gets smarter, and also gets more complicated in the storytelling. If you've been watching from Genesis, you'll see it's very simple, very rudimentary, and then they keep on adding more and more elements to the stories. And at this point, I think we even have like a character. We even have we got an angry guy, who doesn't want to be there. We also get more time with characters. Like we had a few chapters with Joseph, but now we're going to have a whole book. It's 40 chapters with Moses. So it's actually in a lot of ways it's not better, but it's just more interesting, or the writers are improving, I think. So in verse 21, when God says, I'm going to send darkness, and this is going to be a darkness that you can actually feel, I made a flippant comment about, I guess that darkness isn't just the absence of light. Darkness can actually be something. And the reason why that's important, and I could have taken a bit more time with it, is because Christians will claim that God didn't make evil. It is just the absence of good. Just like cold is just the absence of heat. or in this case, dark is just the absence of light. So certain things have an energy, they are something, and then other things are just the absence of it. And this is a way to remove the responsibility from God for evil. But what we're learning here is that darkness can be a thing. Darkness can feel like something. He can send darkness, right? And it's important because evil is a thing. I don't think evil is a thing, but if we're going to attribute good to something and evil to something, if we're going to make these words mean something and represent things, then the things that they represent are things. If someone is doing a behavior that we want to call evil, that behavior isn't just going to be the absence of good, right? It's going to be an action that is evil. The absence of good is neutral, just like the absence of evil is neutral. When you start neutral, you can go either way, and one of those ways is evil. And God has created that parameter where we get good and evil and neutral. We get the whole thing. And He's made all of that. He could have stopped at neutral. He could have gone from good to neutral. The absence of what He is, which is all good, would just be neutral. It doesn't have to be evil. Like that, all of that is His design. So evil, if it is something, just like this darkness is something. It's not just the absence of light. So that was kind of my point. So that's basically chapters 1 through 10. We're doing every 10 chapters recap for this one because then we'll have 4 recaps and 40 chapters. It'll be a nice even number. I should have actually done that last time because there was only 50 chapters in Genesis. I know that in this recap, I sort of blew past the craziest story, but I did spend a lot of time on it when I was actually doing that chapter. Emergency circumcision to save the life of the dad, but I don't think we need to go back over that insane story. The whole story is pretty crazy. I mean, it's pretty over the top as far as fairy tales go. All these wild plagues and everything like that. But because I was raised with it, because I was indoctrinated into it, because I've heard the story so many times, it doesn't seem that crazy to me. That's the wild part. And what we end up doing is we end up arguing tooth and nail for things like who hardened Pharaoh's heart first. And if you go and watch the episodes, you'll see that God does most of the hardening. But then you also can get lost in the reeds of like, oh my goodness, they lined Moses' basket with tar and the ark was lined with tar. You see, there's a similarity there, which means that's a connection, or the connections that I already mentioned, or that the Egyptian gods are the ones that are being pegged off by the plagues. You can go like, look at how that's amazing. Isn't that neat? We can get lost in these details. But by the way, that's a literary move. That's kind of cool. It really is. It's a neat thing that the Hebrews, who would have known who those gods were, could write this story where they're like, we'll show their gods with this tale. It doesn't make it true, but you get all hung up on these little factoids that you just miss these huge glaring errors and the bigger philosophical issues, and then just the complete and utter bedlam that doesn't reflect anything in reality. You know what I mean? And I don't just mean that it's a different culture, because of course that culture isn't going to match this culture. So if I'm looking at this book and I'm confused by certain things and it's because, it was significant culturally, fine, fair enough. But there's still not really tons of supernatural activity right now. There aren't piles of gods, let alone one god. Water is not being turned into blood, I'm sorry. It is fun to have these discussions, but I think we need to keep things in perspective. Anyway, that's it from me. If you made it this far, you should be subscribed. If you're not, you're out of your mind. Like this video, comment on it, and we'll see you next time for Exodus chapter 11. Bye.